Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to a more Yule-tidy version of Cladding Matters. I make no apologies for the fact that I'm trying to make the place look a bit more uplifted for the time of year. But as per usual, we have Hamish McClay on, as friend of the show, Steve Day, and we've got a special guest, Dominic Ahern, which I'm going to get Steve to properly introduce in a moment. But before we do that, let's start the show properly. Cladding Matters is a show that talks not exclusively, but primarily about the cladding disaster that has befallen many properties post-Grenfell, where people are effectively locked in to their properties. They can't sell them, they barely can insure them, and the rents and the ground rents and extra bits of money are being pulled out of them right, left, and centre. And it's frankly a bloody disaster. Excuse me for swearing. But we are today talking about when safety takes second place to profit. And I will probably start off by resounding how many lives is too many to lose. I thought zero myself, but we're moving on. Hamish, would you care to start us off?
I imagine it was probably evident before the start of this century that we would have fires in high-rise flats or not such high-rise. In fact, some of the flats aren't that high at all, and up to 2 and 3 stories. There are difficulties and can be difficulties. What we forget, each Friday it comes around, and Friday seems to come around so very quickly.
Yes.
But that is the one time, and we spend just 25 minutes speaking on this particular subject. Some people have to live throughout this particular experience 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and sometimes to get thrown out of where they are living, to get put somewhere else on a temporary basis, no one telling them how long that temporary is going to be. There are costs involved. There are costs to mental health. There are costs to health generally. There are costs to lives from people who don't survive because of the challenges they're put under. And we know some even have actually taken their own lives as a consequence. But a little bit of a spotlight at the moment on the financial aspects initially, because whatever is done, if it's not done effectively, it has to be done again. And the absurdity of what we're having to go through, the traumas, the cost of having to sort of live there with all the other bits and pieces, it will need to be done again if the standards are not met. And the standards which are being shown or being accepted at this particular moment in time by everybody other than the people that live there, and in fact the people who support them, there are several people supporting people living in those particular places. That the financial side of things, they're the mortgage people. They do not believe that they can afford to support people living there with mortgages. They can't provide mortgages. There are the insurance people who feel that it's a high risk, so they have to charge them higher. There's also the freeholders, not the freeholders, but sometimes the freeholders, the management companies and people of that particular nature who are actually making charges that need to be consistently increased to cover all of these particular sort of costs. So if you're going to do something, why on earth can't we do it right the first time? Because it just costs more and more. And this is unfortunately something which is going to be imposed. And it's one of the great reasons why we have Dominic sort of here this week, because he can actually give us some perspective of that.
Well, first of all, I'm going to bring on Steve. Welcome back to the show, sir. Always good to see you. Now, would you please, first of all, introduce why Dominic, what he represents and why he's here?
Yeah, well, Dom's a great friend in the fight, but he's been spending a lot of time looking at the macro issues around building safety and where it's gone wrong, and he's done some very thoughtful substacks which have got a lot of attention, and his thoughts on actually what the larger objective is of the government and campaign groups and what's really going on behind the sort of ups and downs that we're always pushing on Cladding Matters. I think it's good for us to hear maybe more of a reflection on where we really are and I think he's the man for the job.
Excellent. Well, Dominic, I'm going to welcome you officially to the show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day. So your reflections on the current state of affairs, can you comprise them into a summary, if you will?
Yeah, well, I guess my sort of high-level view is that we're kind of being gaslighted to some extent. I think the government are imposing partial remediations on people, who have bought properties in good faith that they would have been built to standard, that they would be readily mortgageable, readily insurable, and that they've imposed this whereby insurers are now questioning whether or not they want to insure these buildings at all. So I think from a macro level, we're breaking the social contract of people in terms of that sort of tradition of people work hard, they pay their taxes, they save a deposit, they get a mortgage, and this is meant to be something that gives them safety and security, something in the basic need in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So and we're turning it into a gamble, really. We're allowing industry to game the system, to cover things up, to decide what they think is acceptable in terms of fixes, but not making sure that all of the stakeholders are happy with it. So I view it's kind of, we've got this housing out there that is counterfeit housing. It's not what people bought. It's not worth what people have taken out huge loans to. And that is causing huge stress, like productivity issues. People are having to effectively become lawyers and detectives in their free time, so they can't focus on themselves and their work and their careers. Arguably, this is hitting one of the most productive stratas of society. People who have been inspired to save up for a deposit and get on the housing ladder and sort of throw themselves into society as productive people. And I think the reason I started writing the Substack was I found that there weren't people really writing about it in this way. It feels that much of what you see in the media of reporters, they're reporting on what the government narrative is, rather than reporting on what's actually there. So the government say, well, the developers, they aren't fixing these buildings fast enough. We need to speed this up.
Right.
But the people I speak to are like, well, we don't want it sped up if it's not done properly. And if we end up with buildings with ridiculously high insurance at the end that we can't sell. So, but none of the narrative in the media is about actually, well, let's actually tackle what the root problems are. The root problems are the government is pushing through guidance that undermines legislation that's already there, undermines people's expectations, and you can't get agreement and alignment. And effectively,
Dominic, let me be a bit mischievous, because I do this every so often. We're only trying to provoke a response. Be as blunt and as robust as you can. Surely, if we make it really hard for house builders to build things because they've got to keep up to these draconian standards, that means that we're going to be creating even more delays before we get that building stock we're so desperate for.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess there's I would say if the standards are unnecessary, I think that's a separate issue. I think we're working off the assumption that the standards are there for a reason, and that everyone has bought into the fact that the standards are there for a reason. But yeah, I agree. Like, if there are draconian standards, then scrap them. But the problem that the insurers have is that they say that the measures being taken aren't stopping fires spreading. So it kind of really, well, what is it doing? Does it mean that people have enough time to get out? How many people have enough time to get out? Yeah, right. It's all of those kind of questions. But ultimately, I think the standards aren't what the insurers would expect, aren't what we would expect. But yes, if they go beyond whatever needs to be done in terms of keeping a fire, compartmentalizing the fire and stopping it spreading,
right,
then anything more than that, I agree, probably would be draconian. But I think we're talking about the bare minimum at the moment.
Steve, welcome back, and I'm glad to have you here. So, I mean, I was just playing before. Of course, we are dealing with a crisis where the very standards that are being supposedly meted out are below what would normally, under normal conditions, considered the bare minimum.
Well, I mean, we've had some shocking discoveries this week. So I managed to find out. So this PAS 9980 standard, it's the watered down remediation standard, which is currently being watered down further and is due to be completed in early 2026. That's one of two routes to getting a remediation. There's a better way, but you've got to go via the courts via a remediation order.
Right.
Building Safety Act remediation, which is a much stricter standard. And for us at Royal Artillery Keys, the legal advice is that we would actually have our panels removed that they want to keep on under the watered down standard. But shocking, next year, as soon as that standard becomes live, the government will legislate to stop all other routes of remediation other than PAS, which is absolutely shocking. And it's drawn some serious criticism. So if you could bring up the image, Gareth, of Stephanie Barwise's comment. So Stephanie Barwise was a leading KC for the Grenfell inquiry. And she represented the victims of the Grenfell. And she says this becoming law, that's what she's referring to, is bad news. PAS 9980 is not based on compliance with regulations. Rather, it's a very crude form of wholly non-scientific risk assessment. I appreciate the drive to start work sooner by avoiding expensive disputes, but building owners are entitled to a compliant scheme. Building something bad and dangerous just to get on with it is never a good idea. Now, that is from a leading KC condemning PAS. Let's find out what the insurers think. So if you can bring up the ABI now, Gareth. So the insurers in October 25 this year basically worked with the government to try and change this watered down PAS standard. And then if you look at the final paragraph in that, it says we've previously suggested that the UK government should include an annex to the PAS which outlines the insurer's property protection consideration in assessing risk. And it would go somewhere in highlighting the insurer view of risk and the level of remediation required. However, the government has not taken this concept on board and rejected. And so what they've said in the third paragraph from the bottom, insurers price based on risk to the building. And while PAS 1996 improved the safety of the building, which is arguable given Stephanie Barwise's comments, a risk of significant fire spread and damage to the building remains under PAS. Remediation is not undertaken to a property protection standard would continue to be reflected in risk-based pricing. And that basically means it's going to be permanently high insurance. And the final one I just wanted to bring out is the president of the ICM, David Jones, the Institute of Construction Management. He says, and this is very strong, this is the president of a construction institute, PAS 9980 is inherently dangerous, being used to answer a binary life safety question, which is highly subjective. And he goes on to say, it relies on limited intrusive sample openings from which the assessor extrapolates the behavior of entire elevations and interfaces. And he's basically saying that, you know, this is a dangerous standard. So you've got leading construction KC of the Grenfell inquiry, you've got the ABI condemning PAS, and you've also got the Institute of Chartered Construction Management saying it's inherently dangerous.
Is David saying here effectively that it's little more than sticking your wet finger in the air and trying to work out where the wind direction is?
Well, I mean, this is we'll go back to Don, but basically, I believe the approach is to limit the liability to the construction industry as a result of the Grenfell fire, and because the Labour government are wanting to push 1.5 million homes, they're going to force this standard upon us in law in early 26. Right. So we can't get another type of remediation. And that is appalling. And it was so appalling that Gideon Amos, the housing spokesman for the Lib Dems, came and visited my flat within 8 hours of me telling it, coming all the way from Taunton expose this, and we've done some video with him, and you'll see that in due course, because it's very serious. And you'll also see this PAS being exposed in the media very shortly as well. It's going to be on the national news. So this is a great injustice and a total anathema to the victims of Grenfell to have the government's response to water down the remediation standard.
Hamish, this appears to be like two fingers up at the victims of Grenfell, frankly.
Well, it's two fingers up to anybody who lives within these styles and types of residences. What happened in Hong Kong was a reflection of what is going on in the UK. There was so many more lives lost there. We do have, as we well know, we've had contact with Australia, where they've lost lives in Australia. They've tried seriously to do things about it in Australia. They're working hard to achieve something, but it's constantly under discussion. Whereas in this particular sort of country, what we seem to be able to doing, and I'm sure this is where, if we had just had a comment from Dom there, it is a cost that needs to be made to actually improve these buildings, but we do need to improve the safety of the buildings. And that cost does need to come from somewhere.
Right. So it seems to me, Steve, that one of the tenets of the push you're saying is almost the assumption that the homeowner, the householder, should somehow have the bill laid at their feet, which seems wholly wrong. Surely, if it wasn't built to the correct standards back in the day, and it isn't built to the correct standards right now, surely remediation should be paid for by the builder.
Well, that's the idea of what we've been doing for the last 5 years with the Earl of Lytton scheme. The idea is consumer protection for all defects and for all time. Not timing out after 5 years. And we basically have an opportunity in the remediation bill, which we'll be using. We also will be viciously and robustly challenging this PAS 9980 law, which is going to be pushed into Parliament early next year. And you're going to see a big fight on our hands. And in the meantime, we've been looking at the exposure to the banks, and we will be exposing this shortly, because we think there's a huge exposure to the banks, which will form a great lobbying group along with the insurers who we're working with to challenge and take on the construction industry lobby, which is basically saying restrict our liability so we can build homes. Or the banks, if they have a certain amount of knowledge of the liability coming their way, we think that will be the way to convince the Treasury to override the builders. And I'd like to say it's the moral and decent thing that will make this problem go away, but it won't be. It's going to come down to who's got the biggest lobbying power, and that's what we're working on.
So what you're saying is, Stephen, before I want to say anything, I want to thank all those new viewers on YouTube. I see them popping on and off, and also those on X. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to listen to this stream. We talk about cladding and related issues every week, and the disaster that is. But Steve, what you're effectively saying is only by removing money from their pocket will they take any notice. The moral side of it doesn't seem to be moving the needle at all.
Well, we have a situation where we are basically being gaslit by everyone in the situation. The government are saying there's no insurance problem. We're going to strong arm the insurers to accept lower premiums. The ABI told me that would never happen because we had. Of
course, it wouldn't.
And the next thing is that buildings below 11 meters are safe, and you don't need to cover them. Well, we see Richmond House, where that was literally an inferno, and that was below 11 meters. There's questions about building regulation compliance. We've seen the defect rates, 77% for Taylor Wimpey, going down to 35% for Barrett. The level of defects and the compliance with the law, is shocking. And all the government's trying to do is limit the liability to an industry that frankly shouldn't be protected at all and should be made to pay in full. And they've got lots of money. They've got a huge book of work. So they've got huge prospects to make more money. They got protections through Help to Buy with public funding to help people buy their products. You know, they are the most protected industry in the country, and they are treating the consumer and society as a whole, you know, with contempt and putting their life at risk.
Like idiots. It's treating us like all of us like idiots. And what seems to be amazing is that very protected, yet still in a situation whereby they could build bubkas, they could build a pile of heaving rubble and walk away from it with no recourse to them in reality.
Well, the government is allowing them to get away with it, and this government is going to make it almost impossible to get a full remediation. And you know, but I mean, I don't think people care, frankly, and I think the sad thing is, and the national campaign groups, and I am going to call them out, you know, End Our Cladding Scandal, you know, is silent basically on the very fact that these partial remediations are causing havoc around the country, and they should be fighting every day, like I am on social media, to expose PAS and to say, don't speed up the remediations, do them properly. And all they're doing, and me and Dom's caught them out on it, you know, a couple of weeks ago, they just put out a tweet lamenting the fact that the substandard, partial, dangerous, permanently high insurance, substandard remediations aren't being done fast enough. Well, we don't want them to be done any faster until they're done properly, because every one that's done means those leaseholders are liable for the remaining work. I mean, Dom, what do you think about all of this messaging from these groups?
I think it's dangerous. I can understand why it's happened, because I guess it's like once you're close to government, then they're setting the tone of what's being spoken about. But I think it's that problem that they've become, and I think even kind of some of the bits of the media as well. Yeah, they want to get the interview with Andy Rowe, who's come in as the chair of the building safety regulator. They want to meet Steve Reed in the baseball caps. It's kind of like that's for them that's the that's feels like they're doing something, but they're just reacting to the narrative that the government's presenting to them, rather than seeing through the reality of what's there. I mean, I just want to go back to David Jones's comment. He was talking about how you're sort of limited in intrusive surveys, and how actually that could lead to sort of very different fire spread in real life. We've got a situation on our building where the fire engineer has assumed that a combustible material had been installed in accordance with its BBA certificate, but the developer, who's a large national house builder on the responsible actor scheme, have admitted to me, confirmed in writing, that they didn't comply with that. And I'm saying, well, look, if you didn't comply with that, how do you know it's safe to leave it in? And not even MHCLG, not even the building safety regulator, they're just closing the book on it and saying, well, we followed process, therefore the process is done. But no one's looking and going, okay, well, the process doesn't work because if you haven't done enough work to establish the correct assumptions and base this on evidence, and this is where I think the whole calling it or underpinning everything with a risk-based approach just opens it up to manipulation, and Vistry approving that in my case by actually they should be revisiting our risk assessment and saying, well, actually that's not correct. You've assumed it has this kind of behavior, but it doesn't because we didn't install it correctly,
right?
Or we didn't. Yeah. So that's and I think that's a big deal. But no one, this isn't a big enough deal to disrupt the narrative of wanting to speed everything up.
Not a big enough deal. Yeah. Hamish, would you care to take us home, please, sir?
Well, I think when we go back, bearing in mind that it was only just over 20 years ago where Royal Artillery Quays was built. I don't know how long ago where you live was actually sort of built, Dom, but we go back to Royal Artillery Quays, and Royal Artillery Quays was sort of built in the early noughties. And at that particular time, somebody who was allegedly or supposedly, I suppose is a better way of putting it, was actually looking into the quality of build. We have building control. They are meant to be a body who should be looking after. And they construed that it was perfectly safe.
Right.
They obviously weren't looking, because it took nearly 20 years later for building control of the council to turn around and say, hey, it was not safe. And yet the council turned around and said, oh, hang on. We are councillors. We know better. So we're back to this institutionalized response to the thing. No way qualified to make a decision one way or the other, turns around and said, as far as we're concerned, it's safe. Now, we haven't had the proper, if you like, the proper sort of fallout from the Grenfell to say who was responsible. We know that successively there were so many people responsible for it, but one of the major contributors to the state of the premises that actually burnt down and the loss of 72 lives was the fact that the council themselves were not taking notice from what the residents said. Now, it's not so bad. They perhaps did it without knowledge. But this council currently, where Steve lives, Royal Artillery Quays, where they happen to be, they have purposely said this place, as far as they are concerned, is safe. Now, surely they must be hanging themselves, because they are the ones that should be responsible for the full remediation if they're maintaining it safe. Do they want to pay for it? I don't think so. What will happen if the very worst thing that we actually all fear comes about?
Wow.
Gareth, well, you could just put up that last image I sent you, just on the PAS.
There we go.
Very important. So if you look at the last paragraph on the bottom right there, it says, and this is in the PAS description itself, PAS 9980, for some stakeholders, there is no appetite to consider a race-based approach. And for these stakeholders, the only satisfactory outcome is certainty in the performance of external walls in a fire with zero risk to life as the principal objective. The methodology in the PAS cannot be applied when such a view prevails. There you go. So if your objective is zero risk to life for a remediation, then don't use PAS. And the standard tells you not to use it. So I would say, well, if the principal objective isn't eliminating risk to life, then how many deaths are acceptable?
It's what I led with at the beginning. Just how many people is it okay to kill? Tell me, give me a number.
The PAS standard tells you not to use it if you want to eliminate risk to life as your objective.
Wow. All right. Well,
Next week we will speak about PAS 9980 to take everybody through to Christmas. We'll give it a three-dimensional approach, but look out next week. We will be speaking on the subjects, and unfortunately we didn't get into the murky depths of the full cost, financial cost, because that in itself is disastrous to people living there. What we've got, what is it doing to the state of their lives?
I was going to make a bad taste joke about coming home to a real fire because you're under PAS 9, but I won't do that. Steve, do you want to have the last word?
Well, I was just going to say, just on the cost. So, our insurance is our largest component of our £6,700 a year service charge. So firstly, you've got that. Secondly, you've got costs of all the surveys, the building safety charge, because our building is above 18 meters. So all of that slapped on as well. You've got cost to your standard of living. I mean, I don't know if you can hear all that noise, but I'm literally in a building site.
No, I'm so sorry. I put noise reduction on at the beginning.
No, that's fine. No, understandable. There's netting outside, so I can't see out well. There's all kinds of issues with this, and there's the worry of all the electricity the builders are using. Is we're going to have a massive, great electricity bill because of all of this machinery. We've got a hugely expensive lifts going up and down on the scaffolding. How much electricity is that using? All the drills and all this. It could be quite expensive, and this is all very stressful. But the worst thing is, after the 2 years are up and this is done, we're still going to have high insurance because they're leaving a load of flammable stuff on our fire shafts. And that is killing people here, you know, mentally and with worry. And this PAS needs to go. And we are going to fight PAS 9980 next year. We're going to make sure everyone wants this gone and replaced.
And as Hamish says, next week we'll be delving into what really PAS 9980 actually is and what it means. I want to thank Dominic Ahern. Thank you so much for taking time out to be here. It's useful to have your personal testimony. Absolutely. Steve Day, of course, from the buildingsafetyscheme.org, working with Lord Lytton to have a revolution in building safety standards. And, of course, our Lord and Master, Hamish McClay of Surgeon Bay, with whom we set this channel up in the first place. And all of you out there, these are worrying times. I'm asking you to keep your feet on the ground, reach for the stars, and try and look after that precious mental health. And hopefully next week we'll give you further explanation of just what is going on within PAS 9980. Until then, please take care of yourselves. Bye-bye now.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll polish through the moon, but their word always fails.